Welcome everyone today. I'm Ann Marinello, and I'm so glad to see all of you here on this beautiful day, taking time out of your lives to come together and be together. There are a few announcements that we have for the usual part of the service. If you're new to the chapel, we would welcome having you sign the guest book, which is in the back there, sitting near where Ann Wynia sits. We still have COVID precautions, and what we're doing new is that we're having you keep your mask on for when you come up to light a candle rather than taking it off. I'm a little further away, so I felt like I could take the mask off. And we decided to let the rows be open, all the rows, so that it's easier to do the spacing amongst ourselves. But if you haven't already done so, if I could invite you to turn off your cell phones. I also want to remind you that there is a sign-up sheet out in the back there where you came in for helping with refreshments for the memorial for David Doolittle. And there are other announcements on the back of the program. I see there's some new people here. Is there anyone who would like to introduce themselves or say hello? You don't need to if you don't want to. Yes.
This is my friend McDade. He's from New York. He's shy.
Welcome. Welcome. So glad to have you here.
I'm Cindy Parr from Maryland.
Welcome. Very nice to have you here. Thank you. I'd like to open with wishing you a happy Memorial Day weekend, but I know that's a lot to swallow right now. So instead, I welcome you to this space to honor all that is real in our lives now. It's the weekend of garden sales and the time that marks when it's safe to plant our gardens without fear of frost. There's also usually a Memorial Day parade with marching bands and scouts honoring our veterans. Do we have any veterans here today? If so, you could stand up. Yes, you can stand up. Thank you. I'm also wondering if we have anyone from the Peace Corps here today. Please stand up, please. Many of us reflect on family and friends who have served in war. Memorial Day has long been a complicated holiday as we try to celebrate bravery and courage in our country, while at the same time recognizing the injustices and the pain of war. There are so many battles going on simultaneously. Where are we in this pandemic? We keep being teased into thinking it's just about endemic as compared to pandemic, and then the virus mutates. The gun violence this week, I'm grateful for Bob Williamson's dedication to this issue for so many years. Racism, police brutality, criminal justice reform, migrants and refugees, climate change, gerrymandering and voter suppression, overturning Roe v. Wade, Russia invading the Ukraine, and Ukraine's amazing resilience and resistance. With all this, how do we hold on to hope? How do we remain strong and support each other? Leon suggested I listen to Deval Patrick's TED Talk, A Different Understanding of American Patriotism. Patrick makes the point that we are one of the only countries created on civic values or ideals: equality, opportunity, and fair play. Our founders aspired to create a country with a conscience, and we strive to live these values. Jane Goodall, our UN Ambassador of Peace, closes her presentations with a calling out to the audience, asking them to join her in chanting, "We can and we will." From our hymnal, I'll close with a quotation that is, "We are part of the great circle of humanity, gathered around the fire, the hearth, the altar. we gather anew this day to celebrate our common heritage. May we recall in gratitude all that has given us birth. Thank you.
Good morning. Arriving at the Orpheum in Boston before things got started, you can enter in without a ticket, which is a bit of a strange sensation. There are no lines, no merchandise, no concession stands. There are no great crowds of fans who have gathered, traveling from all over the city, who have driven from all over the state, or who have come from all over New England to see and hear the likes of Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell, James Taylor and Robbie Robertson and the band, the Allman Brothers, the Doobie Brothers, Joan Baez, and so many more. Tori Amos was playing at the Orpheum on the night that I was there, but at 11:15 a.m., 2 hours after the rush of the morning had ended and almost an hour before the lunch opportunity would crowd the downtown streets again, there were so few people around the theater that had always been so crowded. I mean, who goes to the Orpheum when there is no concert to enjoy? I'll tell you who goes. The roadies go. And all of the technical folks and the people who make the magic happen every night so seamlessly. The lighting people and the stagehands, the sound engineers and the videographers. All of the people who clean the theater and keep it safe for us. The often forgotten and the barely remembered, the rarely revered and often taken for granted. They are heroes, really, privately building the scaffold of public dreams. Because when the crowds arrive and the lights fire up and the sound goes live and the concert starts, we need them to have done their job in time and perfectly. They're precious to us, and for the most part, we don't even know who they are. Jackson Browne wrote a song about these unsung heroes. He played the Orpheum himself some years ago in 2008. He started the show with a song called Boulevard, some of you may know, and he ended the night with his all-time classic, which is called Running on Empty. He played Dr. My Eyes, which is my mother's favorite because she gets to move her neck the way she likes. She played that song in the middle of things, and his encore was called I Am a Patriot. I ain't no communist, I ain't no capitalist, I ain't no socialist, I ain't no imperialist, I ain't no Democrat, so I ain't no Republican, and I only know one party, and it's freedom. I am a patriot. I love my country because my country is all I know. The river opens for the righteous someday. It's a powerful song, but the one that he wrote about the unsung heroes of the theater was called Loadout. He wrote, now the streets are all empty, and let the roadies take the stage. They pack it up, and they tear it down. They're the first to come and the last to leave working for the minimum wage, and they'll set it up in another town. So roll them cases and lift them amps, haul them trusses down and get them up the ramps. Because when it comes to moving me, you know you guys are the champs. But when that last guitar has been packed away, you know that I still want to play. So just make sure that you've got it all set to go before you come for my piano. Arriving at the Orpheum in Boston a few hours before things get started, there are people that you meet, good people. I watched them as they worked, preparing the stage for what was to be our chancel, preparing the stage for an event that was to come, placing the lectern directly in the center, flanked by speakers on either side that had power to spare, and getting the lighting just right and cleaning everything. You know, they sound checked the empty theater with the Gettysburg Address. There was no check 1, 2, check 1, 2 with these guys. These guys knew their business. They knew exactly what they're doing. They did not fill that beautiful and well-worn theater with sounds of meaningless. They filled it with the words of Lincoln, 4 And 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men, that all people are created equal. They didn't stop there. They did the whole thing from memory. Now we are engaged in a great and civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. They did it all, ending with these words, of course. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Abraham Lincoln, November 19, 1863. Those words echo freshly in the Orpheum in Boston. There's so much history there. William Lloyd Garrison was there, and as well as Harriet Beecher Stowe. Frederick Douglass was there back in 1863 when the Orpheum itself was only 11 years old. There's probably a plaque or a statue or monument somewhere commemorating this history. Boston hosts and boasts so very much of this kind of thing, but I'm not sure where that is, where it would be. If I still lived there, I might know, or at least I could ask and go find out, go looking for it. There's a monument in South Royalton, Vermont, not far from here, on the South Royalton Green that stands in honor of the many soldiers, Vermonters, who fought in the Civil War. A lone soldier rests his rifle on the ground before him, holding it by the barrel and looking out at the mountains as the morning sun gathers on the right side of his face. And the base of the monument reads, "A tribute to the boys who served in the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. More than 34,000 Vermonters served in the Union War effort. Additionally, more than 28,000 Vermonters served in a voluntary capacity. Our brave little state fielded 17 regiments of infantry, 1 cavalry regiment, 3 light artillery batteries, 1 heavy artillery company, and 3 companies of sharpshooters, and 2 companies of frontier cavalry. In all, 1,832 soldiers were killed or mortally wounded in battle, and another 3,362 soldiers died of disease, imprisonment, or other causes. Their full measure of devotion is still with us, informing us, protecting us, ensuring us, ennobling us. Of course, we do not grieve these losses as we once did. Time does afford us some grace. but these losses do still heavy our hearts, that we could not find a more peaceful resolution in the making of our more perfect union. We did it with guns back then so that we could do it with flowers today. Children play around this monument now, peering around its corners in games of freeze tag and hide and seek. I was there some time ago, last week sometime, and there were kids gathered around gathering sticks and climbing up into the sort of raised pavilion there and then trying to drop it on the heads of adults who were passing by. They dropped the little ones on the heads of adults, and then when it was free, when the coast was clear, they took the big bevy of the long sticks and they threw them out for a great splash on the ground. Kindness comes strangely with children. We all get one pass in life, one arc of time to make our journey. We choose our paths of joy and pain. That part is up to us. As for the meaning of our freedom, its value, we shape the ends of that. But its presence in our lives is something of a gift of those who came before. Children play around the Civil War monument in South Royalton, Vermont, and that seems to make good sense to me on this Memorial Day. It seems healthy to me somehow because there's a way we do things around here. An American way, and Memorial Day is an important part of this. It is a deeply important part. Hi, Lucy. It's important. Just how important it was, I did not realize, not until I did some digging. I came across the words of a man named David Ferriero. He is now the archivist of the United States. When I first met him in North Carolina, he was the head of Perkins Library at Duke University and a colleague. I thought his title was pretty impressive back then, but he's been promoted even further. He's in the nation's capital now, and I recently learned from him, and this I quote, that across the street from the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. stands a monument to the Grand Army of the Republic, the GAR, the most important American Veterans Association of the 19th century. Memorial Day owes its origins to the GAR. I didn't know that. I read that what can be described as the founding document of this holiday that we recognize. The document is called the Memorial Day Order, and it was penned by John A. Logan at the GAR. He was the commander-in-chief. And on the 5th of May in 1868, he wrote, "The 30th of May, 1868 is designated for the purposes of strewing with flowers or otherwise decorating the graves of comrades who died in defense of their country during the late rebellion, and whose bodies now lie in almost every city, village, and hamlet courtyard in this land. In this observation, no form or ceremony is prescribed, but posts and comrades will in their own way arrange such fitting services and testimonials of respect as circumstances may permit. We are organized," he continues, "for the purpose of preserving and strengthening those kinds of fraternal feelings which have bound together soldiers, sailors, and Marines who united to suppress the late rebellion. What can aid more to assure this result than by cherishing tenderly the memory of our heroic dead, who made their breasts a barricade between our country and its foes." They made their breast a barricade. Their soldier lives, the order continues, were the revelry of freedom to a race in chains, and their deaths the tattoo of a rebellious tyranny in arms. We should guard their graves with sacred vigilance. Let no wanton foot tread rudely on such hallowed grounds. Let pleasant paths invite the coming and going of reverent visitors and fond mourners. Let no vandalism of avarice or neglect, no ravages of time testify to the present or to the coming generations, that's you, that we have forgotten as a people the cost of a free and undivided republic. We have not forgotten. We as a people remember. We do the opposite of forgetting. We memorialize, we commemorate. We actively honor the lives of those who came before. But how do we do this? And why should we try to do this today? in the tragic and too soon aftermaths of Buffalo and Uvalde. Tragedies that seem to me to be spectacularly un-American. You know, years ago, back in 1989, this pretty embarrassing thing happened to then President George Herbert Walker Bush. In the words of the New York Times article that I read, networks covering the American invasion of Panama showed a split screen image. On one side, a military honor guard unloading coffins at Dover Air Force Base, and on the other side, a news conference where President Bush, a veteran of the World War II, was joking with reporters. The juxtaposition was embarrassing. So a policy went into place. The Department of Defense instituted a ban against photographing flag-draped coffins returning from war. That ban was prompted by, quote, prompted by what was perceived to be an inappropriate response to the homecoming of fallen soldiers, end quote. And the ban lasted for 19 years until President Obama lifted it in 2009. But in those 19 years, we weakened the habit of honoring those we lost. We learned to turn our eyes away. And yet, in those same years, we were forced to do otherwise. Oklahoma City forced us not to look away in 1995. Columbine and Sandy Hook in Newtown, Connecticut. They forced us not to look away back then, just as Buffalo, New York, and Uvalde, Texas are forcing us not to look away right now. These tragedies are asking us to grow and maturely face ourselves today. These impossibly regular tragedies are compelling us, imploring us to dream away, to end the days of violence. In a poem entitled Tulips, the artist writes,
the tulips keep blooming on their dead stems through the news, as a schoolgirl's blood pools beneath a desk, her body cooling as you turn to the orange-red orbs bending toward you, with beauty that commands attention, for soon their stems will droop, petals fall like minutes. Even now you may see one letting go, wafting down to a desk's sunlit surface in time to catch your glance. Just as you once saw an apple bathing in space, suspended from a limb, before the hollow thud it made in meeting its resting place, among drying leaves and grass already merging with earth. The tulips will not meld with the desk. Their final resting place will take place on the compost heap of your garden's history. But now, you force yourself to stay in the presence of their unbearable tenderness, while they egress, caught by gravity. But one, still so young, translucent sunlight balloons her scarlet gown, and it's up to you to appreciate her yellow depths inside the bright circle. Black-tipped gold stamens rising like antennae, bearing seeds of future beauty, and through its nave, the prism of a yellow sun, celestial play of light and shade, reflected by water in the tall glass vase. And the schoolgirl's spirit, for surely she has left that body, discarded on the tiled floor, soared through the tulips, and now, by God, she's part of you.
The poet writes, the poet, of course, is Laura Foley. The fault lines of what we're experiencing run through our very hearts. so terribly it falls as true that we must force ourselves sorrowfully and unflinchingly to stay in the presence of their unbearable tenderness and breathe deeply, calling back the sacred in all things. Arriving at the Orpheum in Boston a few hours before things get started, you have time enough to walk over to the Common, to walk over its grasses and by its trees, and time enough to come upon the great State House with its gold dome shining ostentatiously. And within its chambers between 2007 and 2015, Deval Patrick, an African-American man, governed the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In March of this year, the former governor gave a TED Talk that was impressive. He titled it, provocatively, A Different Understanding of American Patriotism, and he spoke without notes, and he began casually. He said, listen, I'm worried about our democracy. Nowadays, we have leaders who use division itself as a political tool. They downplay or even encourage, and in some cases, a deadly assault to overturn an election, and a bunch of them are working really hard to make it harder to vote. This was 2 months before we learned about the Supreme Court challenge to Roe v. Wade, which would have impacted but not changed, it would have changed the character but not the content of his presentation. Continuing, he said, the retreat from the processes of democracy, the ballot access, the legislative debate, the judicial review, these are worrisome enough. But what is even more concerning to me is the retreat from the purposes of democracy. These old-fashioned notions of government of, by, and for the people, the rule of law as superior to the rule of any one personality, liberty and justice for all. The retreat from the processes is one thing, but the retreat from the purposes is another. Deval Patrick is deeply worried, so much so that he is concerned that the very model of American democracy, the model we cherish, might be up for grabs. He said, I'm worried not just as a lawyer, as a former public official, but also and mainly as a patriot. This is interesting because, as he explained, patriotism for Black Americans is tricky. It's tricky to love a country that doesn't always love you back. I think of the men who set off to fight for freedom in the world wars and then came home and were denied those very freedoms. Some of them lynched while wearing their military uniforms. I think of the Black laborers who built the great public universities whose doors were closed to them. This was also the case at private institutions. At Duke, where David Ferriero and I used to be employed, that was the case. Patriotism is strange these days, and it got stranger after 2001. It got stranger during Black Lives Matter campaigns, which just seemed so baffling and unnecessary. It got stranger with Charlottesville, and then more so with COVID and the insurrection of January 6th. Patrick said, I don't know when patriotism turned into lapel pins and flyovers and silly arguments about pro football players taking a knee. My love of country is about national aspiration. America is the only nation in human history organized not by geography or common culture or language or religion or even by race, but by a handful of civic ideas. We've come to define those ideals over time and through struggle as equality, opportunity, and fair play. Why? Because that's what makes freedom possible. That's the America that makes me and countless other men and women from every race and background a patriot. Do you know those Where Were You games? Like Where Were You when John F. Kennedy was killed, or Where Were You when Martin Luther King was assassinated, or Where Were You when the O.J. Simpson was in the Bronco being chased by the LAPD, or Where Were You when 9/11 happened? Here's one. Where were you on February 22nd of 1980? When the U.S. hockey team beat the Soviet Union in the Olympics, in one of the most dramatic upsets in Olympic history. We were the underdog. We were the college players mostly, but we went on to win. We were victorious over a four-time gold medal winning team from behind the Iron Curtain in the 13th Winter Olympic Games in Lake Placid, New York. I was 14 years old at the time, And I had boyishly boasted my way for a 7-hour road trip from New Jersey up to New Hampshire for a ski weekend with my friends. I was cocky, and I figured because I had mastered the slopes in the Poconos north of Philadelphia, how could it be different in the mountains of New Hampshire? I learned the answer to that question, and my ego has never been the same. And after the 2 sets of bruisings, those to my body and those to my pride, we sat down around the wood stove and we watched the hockey game. I still remember how joyful I was and how proud I felt. I remember how passionately I sang during the awards ceremony. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? What a question. I understood what Patrick Duvall was saying and about how patriotism was complex, especially with everything that's going on these days, but it is also still rather simple to a 14-year-old boy. In many ways, it continues to be simple for that 14-year-old boy inside this 57-year-old man. And I wonder if it's the same for Duvall Patrick. He was 23 when the U.S. hockey team won the gold in 1980, and I wonder if it's the same for you. For those of you who are gray enough and amazing enough to have been around back in 1980. Duvall Patrick said something that I liked, insightful and grounding. He said, "The founders, for all their flaws, designed America to be a nation of values, a country with a conscience. And we've struggled with and against that consciousness from the start. But true patriots understand that given this context, that America cannot be great without also being good. So when we cage refugee children and to discourage their parents from seeking sanctuary here, true patriots know that we cannot be great without being good. When bullets fly in houses of worship and in schools and in nightclubs and in grocery stores, our leaders choose the slogans of the gun lobby over those of innocent lives. Patriots know that we cannot be great without first being good." He said that patriotism demands more than ceremony and sanctimony. It's about more than what you say that you believe. It's about living your values of equality, opportunity, and fair play. It was absolutely incredulous to him, as it is to me, that things have become so inverted in our time. With all the hyper-partisanship and our entrenched unwillingness to compromise. When did we learn, he asks, when did we learn to shout our anger and whisper our kindness? It's completely upside down. I don't know if that's the reality TV culture that we live in or what, but it's totally backwards. It's time that we learned again to shout kindness, to shout compassion, to shout justice. That's the purpose of American democracy and the source of our greatness. He closes by saying, from all those lawyers who showed up at the polling places in 2020, or at the airports after the so-called Muslim ban, demanding respect for the rule of law, Black Lives Matter, Time's Up, Black Girl Magic, Occupy Wall Street, families belong together, at any given time, and any given issue, they may make any one of us uncomfortable. But they have taken to the legislators, to the ballot boxes, to the courtrooms, to peacefully protest in the streets in order to lay claim to their democracy, its purpose as well as its process, and ultimately to affirm the American conscience. They're shouting kindness. If American-style democracy is to have a chance, more of us had better put down our cynicism and summon up our patriotism and join them. Arriving at the Orpheum in Boston a few hours before things get started, you can get in without a ticket, which is a strange sensation. There are no lines, no merchandise, no concession stands, and no security. There are no long lines of fans. There is just you, and there is just me, and there is just the fragile dream that we share. This fragile dream that we've inherited, this fragile dream of which we are only temporary stewards during this Memorial Day weekend. How will we nurture that dream? How will we honor those who gave their lives in defense of it, those who made their breasts barricades between our country and its foes? How will we strew with flowers How will we strew with flowers the memory of those who are just as beautiful as we? In these good days, these warm days, finally, may we give and take this blessing in our lives and for our country and our home, and may we spread its light like blazes across the sky. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.